Make sure ain't nothing at the next door, but God will never do everything for you because he wants to develop you so he can work through you to be a blessing to somebody else. Can I preach to somebody today? You see, too many of us are worried about making a mistake. And we're so worried about making a mistake that we never make a move. Whenever you try something, failure is always a distinct possibility. But you ought to speak to your life and say, I ain't afraid to fail. You can't permit the fear of failure to cripple your advance. You might fail, but failure is never final unless you accept it as final. Some of you all have heard of Formula 409, right? Do you know why it's called Formula 409? Because he messed up 408 times. Y'all ain't gonna help me preach in here. And when he finally got it right, he called it Formula 409. You see, you can never make a mess that is too big for God to turn around. You can never make a mistake that is so dreadful that God cannot deliver you from it, develop you in it, and bring you out of it. You can never make an error that is so effacing that God cannot erase it and give you a clean slate. If you just give yourself permission to fail, give yourself permission to try, and sometimes that's all that's required. Just try. Just try. Just try to do better. Try to live better. Try to go further. Try to get up. Just try to get yourself together. Try to pull your life in order. I dare you to nudge your neighbor and say, neighbor, at least try. You see, brothers and sisters, our entire lives are built on a maybe. In Mark chapter 9, a man brought his tormented son to Jesus to ask him to rebuke the demonic presence that had robbed him of vitality and productivity. And Jesus said to the man, if you can believe, all things are possible. To which the man replied, I believe, but help thou my unbelief. His response sounded somewhat schizophrenic from a spiritual perspective. First he believed, then he doesn't believe. But can I help you here? I believe that what he was saying is, Lord, all I got is a maybe. I know you can do it, but I'm not going to presume on your goodness. Maybe you will and maybe you won't. But either way, I know you can. And with maybe faith, Jesus moved on his behalf and turned his maybe into a miracle. Well, when we step back into our text in 1 Samuel 14, the scene is that of Jonathan and his armor bearer coming to a place where they were racing a garrison of the Philistines. 250 armed soldiers. Two taking on 250. And what were they going to do? Jonathan says, let us go over to them because maybe the Lord will work on our behalf. Now listen, an armor bearer did not have his own weaponry. He did not have his own armor. He only had Jonathan's armor, which meant that between the two of them, there was only one sword. One sword between the two of them, and they want to attack 250 folk. And the armor bearer in verse 7 proves that he is just as wild and crazy as Jonathan is, because without no armor and without no sword, he says, I'm with you. Whatever you want to do, let's do it. He had unshakable faith in Jonathan, but he had incredible faith in God. And that is why it's so important to hang out with the right people. Oh, you better listen to me right here. You see, I wouldn't follow anybody that I did not trust. And on the flip of that script, I don't want anybody around me that don't trust me. Jonathan and his team had insufficient personnel, inadequate weaponry, and imperfect plans. They weren't equipped, nor were they able to do what they were proposing to do based on their resources. But for everything they lacked, they had one indispensable ingredient. They had maybe faith. Look at somebody, say maybe faith. Unless I hold you too long, let me ask the question, what was it that gave Jonathan the courage to move with a maybe? Can I share this with you? There are two reasons Jonathan could move with just maybe faith. The first reason is because he had a healthy respect for the sovereignty of God. Oh, you got to help me here. Can I just get you to look at somebody and say, God is sovereign? That means that God can do what he wants, when he wants, how he wants, with whom he wants, for as long as he wants, whenever he wants, because he's God. Many of us ask God the question, why? Because I felt like it. I'm God. God is never recognized. God is only revealed. His revelation is by divine design. Let me explain. If you know the direction, you would never need a director. So God gives us revelation on a need to know basis, which means that if God has given you revelation and you didn't do anything with it, don't expect any more, because you don't need to know. Oh, go on and preach, Talbert. Go on and preach. You see, whenever we talk about God, there has to be a graceful uncertainty, a triumphant tentativeness in us as we contemplate and conversate about what God will and will not do, because God is sovereign. See, if you speak with too much certainty, as I hear some folk do, y'all ain't gonna help me preach, then your confidence has become arrogant, because our propositions and conversations must always be conditioned like the Christ that we follow, who in the Garden of Gethsemane, as the only begotten Son of God, did not presume upon the prerogatives of God, but said, Father, if it be possible. That's subjective tense. Let the cup pass, but if not, I'll drink it up. Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, come, let us go over to the outposts of those uncircumcised fellows. It may be that God will work on our behalf. Jonathan had a healthy respect for the sovereignty of God. His maybe established the fact that in his mind, whether he was victorious or not was a decision that would be made by God. Brothers and sisters, I'm just here to tell somebody that God has the final word. God has the last say. God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the say all, the be all, the do all, the know all. Jonathan understood that his life, his future, his options, and his destiny were under the management of God, the leadership of God, the control of God, and the sovereignty of God. The outcome of his interaction with his enemies was in the hands of God. God could turn the battle in whatever direction he pleased. Jonathan did not presume to know with certainty what God would do, so he moved with a maybe faith. As intimidating and opposing as his enemies may have seemed, as threatening as their numbers and weapons may appear, Jonathan knew that if the Lord decided to give him the victory, nobody could keep him from getting it. My brothers and sisters, if God decides to give you the loan, nobody can keep you from getting it. If God decides to give you the promotion, nobody can keep you from getting it. If God decides to give you favor, nobody can keep you from getting it. What God has for me. Oh, my. You see, ultimately, it was not about his achievement, his ability, his acumen, or his attainment, but it was all about the generosity, the goodness, and the grace of Almighty God. This victory would not become because he deserved it, but because God chose to give it to him. His ability to claim it has nothing to do with his ability to take it, but only because God decided to give it to him. I'm here to tell somebody today that God is in control. I said, God is in